Okay, recording is started. Those of you watching the recording did not miss much. It's just me shooting the breeze. Anyways. Before I get started, any questions about things? I know that's a vague prompt, but we're going to get started and I will prompt you guys to ask questions later on. I guess not, so let's get started. So this is a 5 Hive review for Unit 4 of A Push. This is going to be 1800 to 1848, but we will talk a little bit about stuff that will blend into Unit 5 a little bit. So if you don't know about 5 Hive, this is the volunteering organization. I organized this review session. If you're interested in joining 5 Hive, feel free to do so. We take applications on a rolling basis. So yeah, hopefully you've heard of 5 Hive because we've been doing a lot of stuff. I'm throwing this link out there. This is the feedback survey link. So if you guys have some feedback in ways that I can improve my lecture or things that I should continue for my lecture, please do so. Here's the link in the QR code so that you have that link somewhere in your browser or whatever you're listening in on. I will post this link at the end of the lecture. So yeah. Disclaimer, the usual disclaimer. We're not affiliated with College Board. They don't endorse us. We're a volunteering program. So yeah. Expectations, as usual, be respectful to each other. Be engaged as much as possible. Bump your question if I haven't seen it for a while. And this lecture is being recorded, so don't feel pressure to just stay throughout. It's a pretty long lecture, so I understand if you don't want to stay throughout the entire thing. Right. And yeah, we have a pretty heavy agenda for today. So we're going to go through 4.2 and 4.7. 4.7 is going to be a little bit of a cliffhanger because that's before Jackson, the Jacksonian era. But everything after Jackson, including Jackson, is going to be relatively heavy, so I'm not going to do 4.8 Jackson and federal power. It's just not something I think I can do within 2 hours. So yeah. Hopefully all of these topic titles ring some bells. At least hopefully the Market Revolution and Jefferson's name. But aside from that, I think we are good to go. So let's start with 4.2. So 4.2 is about political parties in the Jeffersonian era. So before we talk about what Jefferson did, I want to give a quick recap on the first party system. We touched on it in Unit 3 last time when discussing the Washington and Adams administrations. So the first party system is going to be, the kind of political parties we first see right after Washington leaves office, which is hilarious because in his farewell address he tells us, "Hey, don't do political parties. They're not good news." And then immediately right after, we make political parties and establish our own first party system. So let me tell you what those two parties are. First one's going to be the Federalists, and the second one are going to be the Democratic Republicans. So let me tell you about the Federalists. What did they stand for? Well, they stood for a strong federal government. They also preferred a loose interpretation of the Constitution. So kind of making do with what they had with the Elastic Clause and the Supremacy Clause and whatever. Big proponents of that would be like Hamilton and Adams. And another thing about the Federalists is that they preferred urban manufacturing and they represented New England more so, and they were also a big fan of merchants and all that. They were pretty much people who thought about economy, the American economy, and we'll get to that. We already got to that, actually, when we discussed the National Bank feud between Hamilton and Jefferson. Basically, the National Bank was created to benefit the American economy by making sure that it would actually grow. We will talk a little bit about the American system as well, which would be something a Federalist would support. Now, the other party, the Democratic Republicans, were led by James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. They more looked at an agrarian republic. They favored more of states' rights. They wanted to make sure that states would retain their sovereignty. In addition, they were like supporters of yeomen, which is to say independent farmers. They wanted to protect the common man, so to speak. So that's our first party system. Now, the first president to be part of the political party in this system would be Adams. He gets into office in 1796, but he's actually going to lose the election of 1800. And who's the man to come in 1800? Well, that's Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, as I already mentioned, it was a Democratic Republican. And what makes the election of 1800 very significant is that it was an instance of a peaceful power transfer between two different political parties, even though Adams begrudgingly did it and actually ended up doing a bunch of midnight appointments just to spite Jefferson, which will lead to Marbury v. Madison. We'll touch on that later. So there was a demonstration that the idea of democracy and elections and, transferring power between two factions, so to speak, did actually work. And some historians might call it the revolution of 1800, and they put it in air quotes because it's not a literal overthrow of a government, but rather a transfer of power between ideological or political factions within a government. Some key issues that did lead to Jefferson's victory was the French Revolution. The Federalists mainly supported the British. They were pro-British. But the thing is, the British started doing this thing called impressment. And, well, not many people are going to like that. So more people are going to look at the British in a negative light. And, well, if we see the Federalists who are more pro-British, you could probably connect the dots and think that, yeah, voters are not going to be appreciative of that pro-British sentiment. Another thing that Adams did during his administration was pass the Alien and Sedition Acts, which a lot of people thought would violate the First Amendment. And yes, they did end up getting repealed because it was that unpopular. Another thing was that the Federalists were not actually a united party. There was, at the time of the election, there was a feud between Hamilton and Adams over whatever they wanted to do with the government. Hamilton saw that Adams was too independent, so he favored his kind of vice president pick, which would be Pinckney. Pinckney doesn't really matter, but all you need to know, 1800, peaceful transfer of power. Now, under the Jefferson administration, we will see the important case of Marbury v. Madison, which I touched on very briefly in Unit 3. Basically, the whole case with Marbury Madison was we had a guy named Marbury who was given an appointment by John Adams, and he was denied this appointment by Jefferson's Secretary of State, I believe, who was James Madison. So Marbury takes this case up to the Supreme Court, and what the Supreme Court does was order, hey, Madison, you got to do this thing. Now, that's not the important part. The Supreme Court ordering James Madison to give Marbury the position is not the key point. The key point is that the Supreme Court, under Chief Justice Marshall, is going to establish the precedent of judicial review. That is to say, the Supreme Court now has this duty to look at legislation, key cases involving the Constitution, to determine whether or not whatever's going on in the case was constitutional or not. So pretty significant. And it's going to use this power again in McCulloch v. Maryland. This is going to be during Monroe's administration, which doesn't really matter. Basically, the key case was McCulloch was involved with a national bank, but Maryland didn't like the bank. So what Maryland wanted to do was it wanted to tax the bank, which was under the national government. Obviously, this creates a very weird dynamic between the state governments and the national government, and eventually this whole thing goes up to the Supreme Court again. And what the Supreme Court decides is that Maryland cannot tax the national bank under the Supremacy Clause, which is to say the federal law not land. Federal law is supreme over state law. So that's important. Now we are going to continue on to what Jefferson actually did during his 2 terms. I want to talk about the first Barbary War, which was from 1801 to 5. You don't really need to care about that. Basically, the key thing with the Barbary Wars was that a bunch of pirates in modern-day Libya who were under the Ottomans were kind of interfering with our trade with European countries. And what ended up happening was that they demanded money from the Jefferson administration. When Jefferson refused, they declared war on us. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send the U.S. Navy to kick their butts. And we do succeed. So this demonstration of military power against the Barbary pirates will show that the U.S. will be capable of doing some sort of military action. Cool. Now, another thing I want to bring up is what Jefferson did in response to the war between Britain and France, the Napoleonic War. What Britain's going to do is they're going to impress our sailors, not in the way you'd think impress would mean. They would also interfere with our economic activity in Europe, all for the reason that we were kind of helping France. We're doing it for trade reasons, but of course, Britain doesn't want us to trade with an enemy. So what they're going to do is make sure that they limit that trade in order to weaken the enemy. Jefferson's going to react to this whole shenanigan in Europe with the Embargo Act of 1807, which would restrict American ships from leaving ports and all that. The intention was to punish the British and the French, but that backfired very easily. This actually harmed a lot of American businesses. Within the first year of that passage, we ended up losing 75% of our business activity, which is a bad thing. So we're going to get a lot of backlash, and I included a funny political cartoon that will certainly appear on the AP exam if they choose to test on Jefferson. It's a common thing to test on, which is, again, mocking the Embargo Act for backfiring on the American economy. Jefferson will respond to this whole disaster with a Non-Intercourse Act, which in 1808, near the end of his term, which is basically to lift up all embargoes except for the ones on on Britain and France. But this doesn't really help a lot. Interesting. So what does the Barbary War and the whole thing with the Embargo Act really entail for Jefferson? Well, during this period, Americans wanted to take charge of their own kind of trade, and as well as their economic, assets. That's the key thing to start, because America is a young country at this point in time. You've got to have a stable economy in order to really last long. So that's the key idea with the Barbary Wars and the whole embargo stuff. The most famous thing Jefferson will do, as everyone knows, is the Louisiana Purchase. He's going to purchase a whole lot of land from Napoleon. Now, some of you in Unit 3 might remember that, or Unit 2, Unit 3, should be Unit 3, is that Louisiana at this time was under the Spanish, which is strange. Why would the Spanish give Louisiana to the French? Well, Spain was not exactly independent during the Napoleonic Wars, but that's unimportant. Key thing is that we gained a lot of land. So at this point in time, we have 2/3 of the land we have now today, right? And this map will show you all the territory acquired in terms of modern day borders. There was a question of constitutionality. A lot of Federalists opposed this, bringing up, hey, Jefferson, you're being a hypocrite. And he kind of was. But, again, a little bit of besides the point, aside from westward expansion and expanding, economic things. Jefferson believed that westward expansion or purchasing the Louisiana territory from France would benefit agrarian farmers more so they could expand further west. This will cause a little bit of issues that will be discussed in the next topic. What Jefferson will also send, which is part of popular history, is going to send an expeditionary force under Lewis and Clark Now, as for what they did exactly, you don't need to know about Sacagawea entirely, other than they actually did something with this new territory. It was the intention of expanding west. They did also have some environmental impacts. They did document some interesting wildlife and all that, but not that American settlers are going to care, because they're going to overhunt some of these species and lead them to extinction. Sad. But yeah, the key point is that America's going to start kind of taking hold of its own affairs at this point in time. Any questions about 4.2? Someone's telling me, so I'll give them a minute to finish their question. Yeah, they did, but whatever they did is not exactly tested in full detail on the exam. Yes, they did use some kind of, again, diplomacy with natives, but that's not the key point. I just wanted to bring that up because Jefferson buys this thing and he actually kind of does something about it, not like most countries would do with territories. Is just, oh, we're big now. What do we do with it? Not much. That's the key point. America's going to be well involved in westward expansion. Okay, let's move on to 4.3 real quick. So 4.3 is about politics and regional interests. So yes, we're going to talk about sectional conflict, which you might think is a little early, but no, actually. It did start picking up in the 19th century very early. So, let's talk about the era of good feelings, which came after the War of 1812, but that's unimportant for now. We're going to talk about it in 4.4. What's the era of good feelings? Well, it's a period of time where politics was namely dominated by Democratic Republicans. Why? The Federalists took an L. And the reason why they took an L is that they drafted the Hartford Convention thing, which was suggesting secession from New England seceding from the Union. Interesting. But this backfired because common New Englanders didn't favor that, and everyone else didn't favor that. So the Federalists kind of just grew irrelevant throughout. That isn't to say they immediately collapsed. They had some runs in elections, but they did not win a lot. So for the most part, we're going to see Democratic Republican presidents, such as Monroe, Madison, etc. Now, during this era of good feelings, it's not actually an era of good feelings politically speaking in terms of the domestic sphere, because the era of good feelings revealed sectional tensions. It started to bring up kind of regional interests in politics, started to create a divide based on where you lived, whether or not you lived in the north or in the west or in the south. And we're going to see that happen where James Madison, John C. Calhoun would represent the South, would only be interested in protecting the interests of agrarian farmers as well as plantations and all that, while John Quincy Adams, Daniel Webster, and Henry Clay will be interested in promoting the American economy, will favor businesses and all that. And this will be running along regional lines. So yeah. Now, I mentioned Clay, Madison, and Calhoun because these three people will actually propose the American system. What the American system is an economic plan to jumpstart the American economy, right? America's young at this point. They just won a war in in 1781. Yes. And you might think, oh, that's a bit a while, but economies take a long time to actually get started, especially in this era. So what the American system is going to propose is going to propose a new national bank. It's going to be a renewed version of the Bank of the United States that Hamilton established. It's going to propose the government financing roads and canals to promote transportation, and we'll get to that when we discuss the market revolution. And it's also going to propose a protective tariff to ensure that American manufacturing gets protected against foreign imports. And it's also going to encourage American businesses. Um, what ends up happening in practice is that we will only get two of those. We're going to get the Second Bank of the United States, and we're going to get the tariff of 1816. In fact, actually, Madison and Calhoun is actually going to turn heel on this. They're going to vote against the tariff of 1816. They're going to vote against all this stuff regarding the American system. Why? They believe that it did not benefit the South. So, again, another demonstration of regional interest. In regards to sectional conflicts, the issue of slavery starts to rear its head in like 1820. And yes, I'm referring to the Missouri Compromise. So Missouri wants to become a state. And, the South and the North are going to argue whether or not it's going to be a slave state. At one point, we proposed a Talmadge Amendment, which is to say, which the only thing that asked for was that slavery be prohibited in Missouri. Again, the Southerners are not going to like that. And so we have a compromise, and Clay actually facilitates this compromise. The Missouri Compromise, which is to say, which dictates that Missouri is going to be a slave state. Maine is going to be a new state that is going to be free, and anything below the 3630 North line is allowed to be pro-slavery, but everything else above that, again, the southern portion of the southern line in Missouri, is going to be free. No slavery there. Now, this was a temporary compromise, and it certainly did not hide the slavery issue, because we had an entire war over it in the 1860s, right? Another issue, contentious issue between the North and South, is going to involve tariffs. So we're going to pass two tariffs that will lead to a certain crisis. The Tariff of Abominations in 1828 and the Tariff of 1832. Do you need to know these dates? No, you just need to know that tariffs were a thing that the South didn't like. The South, specifically South Carolina, which John C. Calhoun represented, will kick off the nullification crisis, which is South Carolina wants to declare these tariffs null and void, and this is going to start a whole sectional conflict regarding this. And again, we're going to respond to this with a compromise. We're going to create a compromise tariff of 1833, which placates the South, and still, it's still a tariff, so it also placates New England and the North. But again, this issue is going to come up again. So that's it for 4.3. Are there any questions about that? I'm seeing no one typing right now, so... Is this pretty straightforward, the idea that there's sectional conflict developing at an early stage? Okay. Cool. Okay, let's get to, I guess, the somewhat fun stuff. So, 4.4 is about America and foreign policy. So I mentioned the War of 1812, which is going to be during the Madison presidency. And fun fact, we kind of took an L in D.C. The original White House was burned down during this war. And it actually ends with a kind of stalemate, but that's besides the point. So the War of 1812 will kick off due to a variety of reasons, mainly the British being cringe. I mentioned already before that the British are going to impress our sailors and not, again, they're going to force our sailors to work for their navy, which is cringe. They're going to impose trade restrictions. They're also going to violate our shipping rights in Europe. We have our shipping rights with France as well as Britain, and while impressing our sailors and taking down our merchant ships is a violation of those. In addition, the British are going to support natives in the Northwest Territory. That is to say, the Michigan Territory. If you see the map with the Adams-Onis Treaty, that's the Northwest Territory, the Midwest. And they're going to give support to Tecumseh's Confederacy, and if you guys know who Tecumseh is, he's a Native American leader who's going to continuously fight against the Americans, to fight against Western expansion. His brother is going to be Tenskwatawa, but he's going to die, and then Tecumseh is going to take up that mantle. So those are key issues. The British interfering with our stuff, and we don't like that. So we declare this war, which is like the second war we officially declare. This is the first war we declare with a Congress. So it's an interesting thing of note. Now, how the War of 1812, plays out, not important. You don't need to know every battle. There are a few notable battles, like the Battle of Lake Erie, which is an American W. You might be interested in the American campaign into Canada, which was a massive L for us. But it would be worthy to know that Tecumseh died during the War of 1812 in the Battle of the Thames. And Tecumseh's death is going to signify kind of the downfall of Native American resistance, which will open up westward expansion in the Midwest territory. That doesn't mean that Native resistance is no more. We're going to get a series of wars still. If you look up on Wikipedia, there's a whole article on the American Indian Wars, and it's like a whole series. The ending of the War of 1812 is going to be the Treaty of Ghent, which barely did anything. No territorial changes at all whatsoever. A good thing of note for the War of 1812, though, is American unity. Americans felt like they were actually part of an entire nation. What war usually does, and I mentioned this about the American Revolution, is that and also the French and Indian War, is that it unifies people against the common enemy. This time, the enemy being the British, because who likes the British? So that's a good thing to note. The War of 1812, and this kind of American unity was kind of why we coined the era after that, the era of good feelings, because Americans are going to feel American. But again, there's the whole political shenanigans I discussed in 4.3. After the War of 1812, Spain is actually going to be rather weak. They cannot hold on to all of its territory. And so what we're going to do is we're going to negotiate a treaty, the Adams-Onis Treaty. And Adams not being John Adams, but his son, John Quincy Adams, who will be the 6th president after Monroe. We negotiate that in 1819. Basically what it does is that we actually settle a border dispute over Spanish Texas. And in exchange, Spain is going to give us Spanish Florida. And what that will lead to is a series of wars with the Native Americans living in Spanish Florida, aka the Seminoles. So yeah, again, expansion will lead to Native American resistance as always. Finally, the last thing to know about American foreign policy is something that's a little wishy-washy, and that's the Monroe Doctrine. We don't have an official document that will declare the Monroe Doctrine, but it is an idea thrown around by Monroe, actually John Quincy Adams, because he's the one who penned it. But it's going to be thrown around during the presidency of Monroe. Basically, the idea is that the Western Hemisphere is going to be left off to the U.S. They're going to ask the Europeans to not mess with our side of the pond here. Of course, we kind of can't enforce that at this point. And it's going to be clear enough in the 19th century, if you know anything about world history, Spain is going to try to get back Mexico after the Mexican Revolution. And the French are going to interfere with Mexico, which will lead Cinco de Mayo. Spain will also be involved with South America over and over, and we're not going to really do anything. But what is important about the Monroe Doctrine is that it establishes an idea in Americans' minds for foreign policy that will be far more relevant in the 20th century when we talk about the Roosevelt Corollary and everything else. But yeah, the Monroe Doctrine is basically a suggestion. Okay, any questions about that? Oh, I just realized I forgot to change the... the bottom bar there. I thought it was changed, but apparently something didn't work out. Any questions about 4.4 though? I'll update that after the lecture, by the way. No questions on American foreign policy at this time? I see no. Nope. All right, let's get to an analysis. We're going to actually read a part of Monroe's seventh message to Congress, which highlights key ideas about the Monroe Doctrine. So this is a very short excerpt, even though it's relatively long. It's a huge block of text, and there's no paragraph indents because at the time nobody did paragraph indents. So I apologize for that. But read through this passage, and then try your best to respond to all of the arguments. Not arguments, all the parts. For part D, it is pretty much it's purposely vague so that you can construct any argument regarding the Monroe Doctrine or foreign policy that you could use the Monroe Doctrine as supporting evidence. And as for A, this is going to come from the passage. Couldn't they think of students in the centuries? Well, it's a common thing among English texts and legislation in this point in history that they don't do paragraph indents, which is actually why we have fun little anecdotes regarding territorial disputes in the colonies, especially regarding Staten Island. If you watch the CGP Grey, you'll know where I'm coming from. As always, if you have any questions about this, feel free to ask. I'm going to leave the actual full screen thing up for our friends watching the recording. And then I will check back a little bit later. As for the time, I forgot to mention. How silly of me. Let's regroup at maybe 5:40. Maybe that's a fair time. Let me check how people are feeling. 10 minutes. This is before Andrew Jackson and the Whigs. We're not going to talk about Jackson today. We're going to have to talk about him tomorrow. Looks like 10 minutes seems like a fair amount of time. I don't know if Ping Pong was responding to that or responding to a different message in the chat. 10 minutes is good? Okay, we'll regroup at 5:42. For those of you at home, feel free to pause the recording at this point and attempt this analysis yourself. Okay. I'll be monitoring the chat for any questions. So yeah. For those of you who are new, we're looking at this piece of text from the Monroe message to Congress. And we're just writing a little analysis of it. Not fully detailed. You don't have to go full SAQ on it. We'll have SQ at the end. Just a reminder, we got 5 minutes left. Just want to check in. How are we looking on time? You think we will need a little extension? Or I think we'll see when some of you guys reach part D. Perfect. So part D is supposed to be vague. Basically, you want to construct an argument, and then I should have probably made this explicit. You should explain how you're going to use this source as evidence for that argument. Does that make sense? Yep, make a thesis and back it up. Explain how this would be relevant to your kind of thesis. We have 1 minute left. Do you think we will need an extension? How are we looking on time? Oh, it is 5:42. Let's give it a 5:43. Okay, some of you guys are posting. I will be looking through the responses. Let's see here. Okay, let's read through some of these responses. So for part A, let's see what some of you guys said. Monroe explains his stance on America's international politics and how the U.S. should interact with other governments when it comes to imperialism in the West. So, summary: he wants to make clear what we should do in the context of all that. Okay, that's a good explanation. Monroe doesn't want any European interference. Sure. It could be a little bit more elaborate with that. Monroe's intentions were to restore the fundamental view of isolationism suggested by George Washington when the United States was founded. He describes that America shall not interfere with any displaying his wishes to isolate America from European influence. That's good. Monroe's intentions in the passage is to establish the idea that the Western Hemisphere is under the authority of the United States, although they will not interfere with European power of the states they currently control. Yeah. Okay, all good responses. Let's look at part B. Monroe says European powers trying to expand their power in the Western Hemisphere would be taken as an unfriendly disposition towards the U.S. All right. Because it defines a foreign policy change. No, and that's not exactly what I'm looking for. I'm rather asking why a historian might say that this passage would represent the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is not necessarily a foreign policy change per se. I'm more focusing on the content of the Monroe Doctrine, not the fact that we have that Monroe Doctrine. If you know what I mean. A historian might argue that this would encapsulate the Monroe Doctrine because it describes the wishes of Monroe to remain a power only associating within the Western sphere of influence. I think you mean Western Hemisphere, but that also works. I get what you mean. Historian might argue that this would encapsulate the Monroe Doctrine, as it says that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere and dangerous to our peace and safety, suggesting that the United States is giving a warning to other nations to watch their expansion in the Western Hemisphere. Good responses. The U.S., let's look at part C, sorry. The U.S. won't interfere with the war between new governments in Spain. Yes, that would be a good piece of evidence they would use. Doesn't represent it well, since they still relied on British Navy to keep European powers away from Latin America. Yes, that is something that did happen. Pax Britannica. You don't know. That's all right. Ping Pong, did you read through other responses and get what I would be expecting? That the U.S. didn't necessarily enforce the Monroe Doctrine by itself? Okay, good. A historian might argue that it wouldn't represent the Monroe Doctrine as it states that it would continue to adhere to their neutrality. Wow. Very good. The war between new governments in Spain going counter to the idea that America has control over the Western Hemisphere. Very good response there. I liked that one. But what you really did well there, I want to explain to everyone, is that you picked something, a piece of evidence out of the text, and you skipped the rock. That's nice. But you didn't have to do that, obviously. But I can see you put a lot of effort into that. Let's look at part D. Monroe did not want European powers to gain more territory, believing the U.S. should prevent their future expansion but not interfere with European powers' current colonies. Okay. That's an interesting argument. Yes, that's a good argument. For a little quick write-up for you, explain how you would detail a little bit how you would use this text to support that. I'm lazy. Valid. I would use this excerpt to establish the idea that the traditional ideals of George Washington never completely left Americans coming after him, despite the numerous times America intervenes with Europe in the future. That's a good argument to construct. Yes. And finally, despite America having been a colonial territory, it doesn't seek to oppose European nations outright, as suggested by this document. The excerpt has directly shown the limits that America would take against the Spanish, for example, not opposing them in favor of the new governments. Yeah, good. Oh, you did pretty well. Good responses as a whole. And obviously you guys understand the whole thing with 4.4. Awesome. Let's move... before we move on, I'm doing it a little quickly. Any questions about this? Pretty straightforward, I'm hoping. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Now we've reached the market revolution. The fun stuff. All right. That's sarcasm, by the way. So let's talk about manufacturing. What's the market revolution? What's the whole industrialization? I thought we had the industrial revolution later. We did. We had the second industrial revolution. But this kind of industrialization is like an early form of manufacturing rising up throughout the Americas. We see the rise of factories, the rise of urban centers, all kind of characteristics of industrialization. For instance, we're going to see the Lowell mills in Lowell, Massachusetts. If you go to Lowell, Massachusetts, they're no longer in operation. I know that because I've actually been there for no reason. You'll also see the rise of commercial farming in the Midwest. So, what commercial farming is going to be, instead of farming for self sustenance like the Puritans did in New England, there's money involved. You're going to do farming for the sake of, well, self sustenance to some degree, but also that self sustenance is selling stuff to other places. And what those places are going to do with the crops you sell to them, they're going to be processed or packaged and, shipped off to somewhere. And another thing about commercial farming, we're also going to see the rise of cotton kingdoms in the South. And we will explain why when we look at technologies. Basically, the rise of textile mills require the input of cotton as a resource, a natural resource. That's what textiles are made out of, cotton, or some kind of thing. Fabrics are made out of cotton usually. And so what happens is that we're going to have this little kind of relationship between the North and South. The South gives the North cotton. The North is going to process that cotton in textiles, and they're going to sell it back to the South. So yeah, that's the kind of relationship. And that actually key relationship is something that College Board makes explicit in their CED. Of course, New England, or the North, is also going to sell this to the West. It's also going to sell it to other countries in Europe as well. So yeah, that's one key point in trade, that we start making a lot of clothes because of cotton. We also need to talk about technologies. We actually saw quite a bit of innovation in this point in time. We see the rise of steam engines, we see plows, the mechanical reaper, and the cotton gin. So let's talk about the steam engine first as an example. The steam engine is going to use steam. But this is actually kind of big because previously we mainly relied on horses and wind. And if you know anything about those components in transportation, it's slow. So the steam engine actually effectively uses something that we can get easily, steam, right? And hopefully you guys know how to get steam, water. And we're going to apply it to steamboats. And we're going to also apply it to railroads. So those are significant, and I'll explain that when we talk about transportation. Plows are going to be significant for farmers. It's going to make farming easy in the West. They're going to be used on soil. They're easy to use for the soil. It makes the soil easier to work with. Mechanical reaper is going to make it easy to harvest crops. You no longer have to use a scythe manually, and if you ever used a scythe, it's a little hard to do, and it's also time-consuming to do it by hand. Now we have something that's a little bit easier to use. And now there's the cotton gin. That processes cotton to send to the North at a faster rate. Now you would think that the cotton gin would make the lives of slaves in the South easier. No, it just makes the lives of slaves in the South worse by increasing demand for slaves. So that's one side effect of the cotton gin. And again, cotton gin will lead to the rise of cotton kingdoms, because when you got the cotton gin and you're making more cotton and you got the demand for cotton growing, you get rich. Well, maybe not you. Maybe the very rich guy who owns like 1,000 slaves. And it's going to. This is actually also going to create an elite class of Southern planters. And we might touch on that when we talk about the society during the market revolution. As for transportation networks, here's some things that we did. We built canals and we built railroads. And the reason why canals are actually pretty important is that before we actually used to rely on natural routes, such as like the Mississippi River in the South. Now, what canals will do is actually it will connect bodies of water with to other bodies of water. And a good example of this is going to be the Erie Canal, which will connect the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. This is mainly going to run through New York, which makes New York rich, specifically the city of New York, not the state exactly. New York City is going to become an urban center because of this Erie Canal. So now we have a complex network involving rivers and canals for which we can use the steamboat. Another thing we also end up using are the railroads. Probably the most famous one will be the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. But you should know that when we used railroads in this time, for the most part, it only connected the West and North very tightly. We rarely see any railroads in the South. Why? They're not into that stuff. They're into plantations, and farming. So they're not going to be necessarily motivated to sponsor those railroads. And again, if you recall earlier, the South opposed the American system, and part of the American system was financing roads and railroads. So yeah, they're not going to allow those railroads to be built as much as the North will, North and West, I should say. Any questions on 4.5? Yes, boats can move heavy things. Were normal, like your average person, able to afford to go on trains and steamboats or similar things at this point? That's a good question. When you say normal or average person, do you talk about the middle class? For the most part, yes. The middle class is going to grow big enough and it's going to be financially stable enough to afford some of these. But this is rather more of a luxury. For the most part, they're going to be used for transporting materials, but they can transport people. And we will get to the middle class when we talk about society during the market revolution. It's a good question. It's a good question. You're kind of prepping us a little bit for the next topic, which is society and culture. We've gone to our first immigration wave. So let's talk about the Irish and the Germans. First off, I want to talk about the Irish. Why did the Irish come to America? Well, both of them came to America because economic opportunities and growing urban centers and all that. That's part of the thing that attracts immigrants. Industrialization tends to attract immigrants. And we'll see this in the Industrial Revolution as well. Anyways, that's not the only reason that the Irish will move over. The Irish will move over because the British are so bad at dealing with the potato famine. In fact, I would like to say that the parasite that caused the potato famine isn't the blight, but rather the British, because who likes the British? Not me. That's a joke. Partially. But yeah, the potato famine in Ireland is going to be really bad. So bad that a couple million of people are going to die. And a few more million are going to migrate, mainly to the America. To the America. But the Irish are not going to be exactly well off, because we're going to see some anti-Catholic sentiment. They're going to experience prejudice. So too will the Germans. We're going to see the rise of nativism in response to the immigration wave here. For the most part, they're going to live in urban areas in the north. They're going to live in big urban centers like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, etc. They're not going to populate the Midwest a whole lot, but they will be present there. They will have some presence. They are going to build pretty strong communities in urban centers throughout the North and the West. And actually what they're going to be able to do is they're going to establish political machines such as Tammany Hall, which is associated with Boss Tweed. Do you need to know about Tammany Hall yet? Later. We'll get to it. We'll get to it later. Just know that the Irish, like the Germans, were able to kind of become a part of American society, to kind of integrate themselves into that. They'll be pretty much one of the largest groups in America, and I think that's still the case now. Same for the Germans. They're going to be the second largest group in America to this day, simply because they were there before everyone else. The primary thing to also note about Irish immigrants is that they're going to mainly work as factory workers, which is going to be a little bit different from the German immigrants. Speaking of which, let's move on to the German immigrants. So the Germans are just going to, for the most part, are going to move for those economic opportunities, but starting in 1848, we're going to see a series of key political events known as revolutions in Europe. And if you've taken AP Euro, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is going to mess up the lives of a few German families. So what they're going to do, they're going to move out to a better place that's more stable, aka America. Now, unlike the Irish, a good chunk of these Germans are going to settle more in the Midwest rather than the North. They are going to have some presence in the North. For example, in Pennsylvania, we have something called Pennsylvanian German. Never heard of it. I've heard of it. It's just, I don't want to hear about it. And for the most part, they're going to be craftsmen, artisans to some extent. They're also going to bring farming techniques to the Midwest, such as crop rotation, and ways to make the soil actually last long enough for a long season of harvest. Now, a key thing you should know is that the Irish and German, while they face prejudice from the nativists, they're going to be able to establish strong communities in the North and the Midwest. So yeah. Let's move on to classes, social classes. So during this whole market revolution, we're going to see the rise of the middle and the business elite. And the middle and the business elite are going to feel good. They're going to benefit from the market revolution. They're going to have stable income, stable economic opportunities. Their living standards are going to improve. I included a painting by Henry Sargent. It's called The Dinner Party. And a lot of historians tend to look at this painting as a representation, which is a little strange, because all of this is just a dinner party. But key ideas is that you get to have leisure, at least for the business elite and some of the middle class, and you're going to see the rise of clubs like the Philadelphia Club. Also, another key point about this growing middle class and the business elite is that there's going to be economic opportunities in the rise of a concept called the American Dream. And probably the one person to represent that is the son of a German immigrant. I'm talking about John Jacob Astor. And if you know who that guy is, great. He's a rich guy. Was a rich guy. He's dead now. But if you don't know who he is, basically he was the son of a German butcher, and he's going to start taking advantage of economic opportunities to establish lucrative businesses. And he really climbs up the ranks. He climbs up from like the middle class to the business elite. So social mobility is a small idea, but it is there. So it's an interesting idea to note. Also, John Jacob Astor does get referenced in the Titanic musical. I remember that off the top of my head because it's just a lyric. Anyways, enough about that. Let's move on to the other part of the social class thing, the working class. Now, not only do we see the growth of the middle class and the business elite, we see the growth of the labor unions as well as and with that comes the working class, or vice versa. So when we see the rise of the working class, we're going to see labor unions sprout out. Why? Well, you have more people being dissatisfied with their general working conditions. What did labor unions fight for? You know, what most labor unions fight for today and also in the Gilded Age. Better wages, better working conditions, and they're going to do strikes and labor protests to try to twist the arms of business elites to, stand down and to give them those demands, given to those demands. Examples of labor unions will include the Lowell Factory Girls Association, which is basically a labor union of the Lowell girls, basically the children of New England families who work in textile mills. Yes, this is a labor union um, of children, which is messed up for sure. You'll also see the rise of the Working Men's Party, which is not exactly communist or socialist yet. It is just a bond, like the rise of a community or a labor union among working men. Now, that's cool and all, but I think the most important thing that College Board will actually test you on, if it's going to appear as a question, it will probably be this in this topic, aside from immigration, and it's going to be women in society. So let's talk about women in labor, like as workers. So for the most part, we're going to see them working in family units under the Rhode Island system. Basically, the concept of the Rhode Island system is that an entire family is going to be involved in the production process. The father, whoever the big man is, usually it's the father, he's going to give like these kinds of orders throughout the family. What women are going to do and the children are going to do is they're going to assist in producing textiles. Another system is an agreement with families where they send their children, mainly girls, to textile mills such as the ones in Lowell, and they are going to do work there. And what Lowell textile mills are going to do, not just Lowell, but other textile mills are going to do, is they're going to establish their own rules, and they're going to be very strict about it. Think of it as a very bad boarding school. In fact, the Lowell system, as well as the market revolution, most of the stuff regarding the school system right now does come from the market revolution. So the concepts of spring break or summer break, all that, or even the concept of boarding schools, that comes from the market revolution. So blame the market revolution for your very bad school schedule. Working conditions were brutal. They would also involve corporal punishment as well. Most women who worked in these kinds of mills, they were not well paid. Other women who did not work in textile mills mainly worked in as servants in other kinds of factories, so not just textile mills. And I don't know why I include seamstress. Seamstress is what we call the workers in textile mills. And the reason why we do see a lot of women work in textile mills and other kinds of factories and as domestic servants is that we have a growing working class, and part of that will involve women. And in the working class, if they don't have enough money from the man himself, women are also going to have to work to contribute to family income as well. Now let's look at the other side. We're going to see the development of the cult of domesticity, that is to say, the separation of the private and public spheres. So let's talk about women's roles, gender roles in that context. Women, for the most part, in the middle class, were left to households. And what did they do in there? They were mainly teachers and whatever else they could do at home. Writers like Lydia Maria Child. Key idea here is that because they worked at home, there was a kind of assertion for teachers and homemakers that women had some kind of important value in the family unit. And this will be a kind of a defining point when we see the feminist movement later on. Catherine Beecher, who is an early feminist, is going to praise the role of women as teachers at home. While women like Lydia Maria Child are going to describe the economic value of women in the family, even though they're not going to exactly work in other factories or in any manufacturing plant like men will for distant markets. Any questions about 4.6? Yes, these immigrants will. Oh, Russia's not in the chat. Immigrants do eat. The Germans will certainly eat their sandwiches. Yes, Irish immigrants will do menial labor. Someone talking about Triangle Fire event. I forgot the exact name, but the shirtwaist and all that. Married women also would work in some of these factories. It was just women in general. But it would be very likely if you were unmarried, then you would be working in those kinds of factories. One thing to note, despite the fact, shirtwaist triangle factory, yes, that's what they were referring to. One thing to note, despite the fact that women provided some kind of value, economic value for the family, this is not going to give them any right to vote. And I'm sure you guys were aware of this in regards to suffrage. All right. Speaking of the right to vote, we will talk about that for the last topic in this lecture. But before we move on, we're going to have a short, quick, and hopefully easy MCQ. There is a bit of a distractor in here. Someone's asking about the effect of it. Yes, there will be some protests in response to that. There's going to be legislation on working conditions. The factory owners are going to be expected to not do that stuff again. So yeah, let's attempt this MCQ. If you can, try to spoiler your response. If not, then at 6:13 maybe, just post your answers all at once. Remember, it says best explains. Right. I think our people at home watching the recording can see it from this screen. If not, I'm going to leave this up a little bit. And you can pause, read through, work on it. Oh, you know what? I didn't really make this entirely clear. Don't forget that women's roles were defined under the idea of Republican motherhood, which is the idea that women had a role to play in the political sphere, in that they would educate their children with Republican values. That's one detail from Unit 3, to reiterate. Because I remember I put Republican mother, but didn't really explain it in this lecture. But that's a reminder. So it is 6:13. Usually MCQs take 1 minute. So please, if you have a guess, feel free to put it in. So yeah. Okay, so I'm seeing some C's and some A's. No D, so I didn't have to talk about Republican motherhood, but it would have been relevant to some extent. Anyone else has a response, or are we going to walk through this MCQ now? We do have some time, so. I guess no one else has any other responses, so So I'm seeing C's and A's. One of those is the correct answer. So, um, let's see. Pun not intended. Uh, let's for one of you guys who responded. Would you care to explain your answer in the chat? Explain why you picked C or A. Okay. So Insomnia says they picked C over A because you don't think their roles necessarily got redefined. Rimu says they picked A because traditionally women didn't leave the house, but now they do for the job. Said, someone said, sorry, I shouldn't have laughed at that. They said that they did POE, B and D, Get Out, and they did not pick C because they didn't really think men got political jobs as part of their roles in the family. So, I'm going to say that someone and Rimu and Obsessor are right with this. It is choice A. The key issue with C is the last part. Academic and political jobs did not really become a definite part of gender roles at this point in time. Okay, what time does it appear? The idea that men in academia and in politics doesn't really become a part of it doesn't really become the part of their it doesn't really be defined as part of their gender roles per se. But that is a good question. But that kind of concept does seem to be thrown around quite a bit in terms of gender roles around the 1900s, early 1900s and late 1890s, very late 1800s. Sometimes people believe that that is the kind of gender roles that we should have as well in this current time, which is obviously misogynistic, but what can you really do? But yeah. Does that make sense why A is the better answer over C? Obviously B and D are wrong. But C is that little distractor, right? So one key tip with MCQs is that usually the right answer is going to be fully correct, but the distractor is going to have one key part that either doesn't directly address the question or it's just kind of not there, which is why they're called distractors, because you got to go through them quick, right? It's 1 minute. But Sephora, you guys did well on this. I don't know what I even said when I Sephora. Okay, let's move on to the last topic of today, and we're gonna leave off there as a mild cliffhanger when to talk about Jackson. So in this time, we're gonna expand democracy. Yay! Not to everyone though. So a bit of context. When the founding fathers established their whole government and all that, the majority of people um, who could vote were not the majority. The only people who could vote were white and landed men. So they were white, they had to own property, and they had to be men. So that's 3 criteria. But eventually, we're going to see the rise of the idea called Jacksonian democracy, but it's not something I really want to attribute to Jackson. We're going to see the rise of politics of the common man, which is something Jackson championed, so I guess that's a fair point. Basically, white adult men will be enfranchised. They're going to have the right to vote. Not white women. Well, some white women will have some degree to vote in certain states. But the majority of states are going to restrict women, African Americans. They're going to limit women's rights to vote. And the reason why this happens is, well, for the most part, is just a lot of people just protesting or, petitioning and all that. Probably the biggest thing that would be kind of something that would shake up the political landscape would be Dorr's rebellion. Basically, Dorr, spelled D-O-R-R, not D-O-O-R. Basically, Dorr's rebellion is going to bring up the idea that men should vote regardless of whether or not they own property, and Dorr's rebellion is going to involve a bunch of factory workers in 1841. And some states will respond to this by saying, yeah, you had a fair point here. And then they're going to enfranchise just white men as a whole. So that's the key thing with Jacksonian democracy. With Jacksonian democracy, we're going to see the return of mudslinging. So there goes the era of good feelings where, for the most part, they have been... for the most part, we've had the Democratic Republicans. Well, we're going to see the rise of the second party system, which we'll touch on. We're going to see partisanship conflicts between Jackson and the Democratic... not Democratic... and the Whigs, which would be the Republican part of the Democratic Republicans. Basically, the Democratic Republicans will split up into Democrats and Whigs. That's the second party system. We're going to see mudslinging, and the reason why we see mudslinging and the rise of partisanship is because John Quincy Adams became our 6th president, and Jackson was running against him. But the thing is, when John Quincy Adams won, Jackson got really angry. To say the least. He basically called Adams' election a corrupt bargain. And this is going to be a main point that he kind of beats with he just beats that over and over in the election of 1828, the idea of the corrupt bargain, that he's the guy for the common man. And what eventually happens is that we're going to see a lot of political cartoons, caricatures, negative campaigning, similar to that of the election of 1800. If you don't know, in the election of 1800, even though Adams and Jefferson were friends, they basically insulted each other to influence the election. Same thing happens starting from 1828, and we're going to keep on seeing this all the way to today. Negative campaigning is still a constant thing that has happened since 1828. I wonder why. So that's great and all. But we're going to have to take a look at the partisanship, the second party system, and see what they stand for before we move on to Jackson. So, I mentioned that the 2 parties are going to be the Democratic Party, which is not the same as the Democratic Party today. Do not make that mistake, or College Board will shoot you. And the Whigs. And they are not people who wear wigs. They're just called Whigs because we also had a party in Britain named the Whigs. So, what did the Democrats stand for? Mainly, it was a coalition of Southern planters, smaller Southern planters, so not elite planters, immigrants such as the Irish and Germans, factory workers and Catholics, which are also Irish for the most part. And what they're going to stand for is, well, they're going to oppose moral reforms and restraints by the government. That's the key point with the Democrats. Which will be one of the reasons why they oppose abolitionism. Anyways, the Whigs are going to consist of wealthy guys, merchants, bankers, very rich Southern planters, And generally, they would be the supporters of the American system. So remember, tariffs, protective tariffs, the national bank, and the government's involvement in infrastructure and all that. And what the Whigs are gonna view, the way they're gonna view themselves, they're gonna be, oh, we are the modernizers, we are leading the American economy and all that, and also we want to improve society and morals and stuff like that. So they're also related to the temperance movement and Protestant reformers, who make up the temperance movement, and we'll get to that when we talk about the age of reform in this period. But that's all you really need to know about this topic. Any questions about 4.7? So the Democrats of the period are generally for the common man, but also they all start to adopt not great positions such as pro-slavery stuff and lynching African Americans. I don't know what makes that for the common man, but to be perfectly honest with you, not a big fan of that. Obviously. Now, our Democratic Party today is a side effect of the party switch from the Nixon era. Well, that has been solidified by the Nixon era. So the transition period between FDR and the Nixon era is a little strange, right? Because we do get some Democrats who remain to be racist as hell, such as the Dixiecrats. Yes, Insomnia is correct about that, by the way. But we do see, individuals such as FDR again, as well as LBJ, people who kind of supported government programs, which were something that Democrats didn't really support before. So that sets the stage for the party switch. Now, officially, Nixon's going to go for the South as a Republican. And then after his election there, we're going to get a full party realignment after that. So Democrats are going to adopt a more liberal approach, and these are the same Democrats that, give us, that will sell their point on abortion and all that, modern issues, revolving rights and all that, civil rights and all that. But I'm not in the mood to get into politics now. So yeah. Any questions about 4.7? Nope. Okay, cool. That's great. Let's move on to an SAQ. It's going to be an old one, actually. So this is the first time I'm actually making you guys look at graphs. Ooh, scary. Anyways, you don't have to be concerned about the 1850 to 1859 part because the general trend is the same. But take a look at this graph. It's about immigration. So it's not about expanding democracy, but I did feel like putting this up. So respond to all the... I did not even cite which APUSH exam I took this from. Yikes. That's not professional. I'm going to put that in. This should be from 2016, I believe. So a very different era of AP exams, but anyways, 3 parts. Let's see. Do you guys think that you could do 6 to 8 minutes? College Board's going to shoot me for this. Oh no, don't shoot me, College Board, even though I'm a very strict critic of your things. Anyways, yeah. Is 6 to 8 minutes enough for you guys to respond to? That was awkward. Sure, why not? Okay, let's say 6 to 8 minutes, and if you guys need more time, let me know. So yeah. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Okay. Some of you guys are already done, so that's good. I think this was one of the shorter SAQs. I don't remember. This is a stimuli-based one, but if you want to edit your answer, feel free to do so. I'm not going to read through them until 6:34, because that's the minimum time. Europe was I don't know why. It's certainly a response. Anyways. If you can, type your responses like as one message. Okay. It's 6:34. I'm going to start looking through responses because I'm sure they're going to be a little bit on the longer side. So, yeah, I'm going to read them quietly and we'll start reading them out loud at around 6:36. Yeah. All right. 1 minute left. Okay, someone actually used T, so that's interesting. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, actually we have quite a bit of responses. I don't know if we had... the majority of people respond. Yeah, that's a good majority. Okay, I think we're going to cut it a little early. If you guys are still working on your responses, that's okay. Actually, it's 6:36. All right, now let's get started. So let's look at part A. Briefly explain how one major historical factor contributed to the change depicted in the graph. If you can't tell what the change depicted in the graph is, let me explain it in words. More immigrants. Each decade we get more immigrants. Anyways, so let's take a look at part A. New technologies like trains and steam engines made it easier for people to immigrate to the U.S. I think mainly steam engines. Okay. One factor that contributed to the change was the Irish potato famine, causing large amounts of Irish immigrants to flood into America to escape famine. That's a good response. One major historical factor that contributed to the change depicted in the graph is the potato famine. Okay, I don't need to read through this because you're... Irish potato famine. Failed revolutions of 1848 in Germany. Yes, that's good as well. Irish potato famine and the revolutions of 1848. Escaping poverty with greater... Okay. Am I Irish? No, not particularly. I don't know. I've listened to much Irish media. I did talk about it, you wrote. All of you guys used it, which is something that I would use for this response as a perfectly valid thing to talk about. Obviously, two, just to be safe. Anyways, that was not an Irish accent, by the way. Let's look at part B. Briefly explain one specific historical effect that resulted from the change depicted in the graph. You have to explain two historical effects because that's part C as well. It's the same thing but with a different thing. So B, the government started having rules and regulations regarding immigration due to massive influx of them, like the Chinese American Exclusion Act. That's a little bit outside of the scope. That's going to be more of the Gilded Age. So like more so like Unit 6. So that is one issue I have. But if it wasn't just that, because if you show the actual entire depiction, it will be an upward trend. Anyways, one effect that resulted from the change depicted in the graph was a large labor pool for employers to hire from. Yes, good. One historical effect is the creation of immigration laws. Such as what? It would be better to explain this. So yeah. One specific historical effect that resulted from the change depicted in the graph was the rise of nativist sentiment in American society, which led to the formation of the Know Nothing Party in the 1850s. The party pushed for anti-immigrant policies, reflecting the fear that new immigrants, especially Irish Catholics, were studying American cultural and political systems. I cannot read fast. Yes, that is a good response. Know Nothing Party. I did not particularly talk about it in full detail, but it is something you could have talked about. I did refer to nativism, but it was a passing reference. Because I think it's something we talk about in a future topic. I think so, yeah, it is. I'm also in Unit 5 as well. One historical factor in the development of nativist sentiment. Okay, yes, Catholic immigrants. Someone clip that. Remember, it's recorded. Yeah, it's recorded, so my stupid accent got recorded. I should have thought of that. In hindsight. Anyways, let's look at part C. Another effect was the creation of ethnic centers formed around these immigrants that came over in mass, often settling with each other and contributing to the idea of a salad bowl or melting pot in the United States. So yeah, this is a little bit more of a cultural effect. Interesting. It would be nice to be as detailed as you could be with this one. So talking about like specific communities regarding the German or the Irish. Another historical effect resulting from the change in the graph is growth of urban factory. So the growth of the working class, I'm assuming you mean. Yes, that's a good response. You had hubs like Chinatown, Little Italy pop up in New York City, and that's where most of the jobs were. Oh, you're hitting on a good point. Urban centers and the growth of communities. It's just that the details you are looking at is not exactly the right ones. Good point is just wrong wrong immigrant groups. Another specific historical fact was the growth of urban industrial labor forces in northern cities. Cheap labor fueled U.S. economy, early stages of industrialization. Also amplified overcrowding, poor working conditions, and class tensions in cities. Yes, that's a good point. Another historical effect that resulted from the trend in the graph was the rapid growth of urban areas. Cities like Boston and New York experienced a massive population increase. Valid. Urban congestion. Interesting choice of word. I don't know if I would describe it as congestion, but I get the idea. As thousands of immigrants settled in... Okay, you explained it. In areas where they could find work and establish typically ethnic communities. Yes. Awesome. Y'all, just chill out. I'm tired. Okay. Are there any questions on this SAQ? Because a good chunk of you, as in the people who gave a response, demonstrated full and good understanding of what we've covered so far throughout, judging from the responses. If you don't remember, this was targeting 4.6, which is the society and culture during the market revolution. Any questions? No? Alright, well, here comes the point. Well, if you guys have no questions, there's this. But also, please fill out the lecture feedback, because I like feedback. That's the reason why. Hopefully that's persuasive enough. But yes, please fill this out. It'd be very useful. By the way, of course, I already pointed out that I did not update the little progress bar in the bottom there. So I will do that. I'll fix that. And yeah. Now, before we end the session a little early, any questions about Unit 4? Can also include any of the future topics, so like Jackson too. Oh my god, Rush. I ate a lot for lunch, actually. What did I do for homework? God damn, I keep on... I did not do my homework. I'm actually going to do that after this lecture. I'm doing my physics honors homework. Actually, I'm kind of doing it right now, as we say. How did I prep for A-Push? That's a good question. For the A-Push exam, for the most part, I just kept on doing practice practice questions and exams over and over. So practicing your LEQs, your SAQs, and your DBQs are going to be good things to do. MCQs are fairly straightforward except for those distractors, but if you just practice the arguing part, I don't know, Silver. You're going to have to listen to those lecture recordings. Also, you didn't listen to this one now, did you? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You meant for school. Oh! I don't know. These are review sessions, so... Yeah. Just wait, Rush. I'm answering Silver's question. Yeah, if you didn't listen past Unit 2, you didn't listen about Unit 3 to 8, which means that you didn't listen to lectures about the entire A-Push. So, A-Push CED. So, memory retention. Well, you're going to have to find ways to make the content seem more outstanding, more memorable in some ways. Here's a little psych thing. Sometimes when you make things seem strange, I remember there's a TED Talk about a guy giving a presentation on remembering stuff. No, I'm bringing in AP Psych for a second. Hold on. He basically talked about First, he talked about his map of remembering his entire speech, the TED Talk. And basically, what it was a marathon or some bike marathon, and they were all naked for some reason. And then there was also one part where Britney Spears was dancing on the coffee table in the in the living room. It is actually being recorded, so actually, if you can look up the TED Talk, I think it's about the Temple of Memory or something like that. I don't remember. There is a TED Talk about this. Basically, if you try to apply the things and make them as interesting as possible, it doesn't have to be overtly weird, such as involving nudity. Hopefully, you don't need to do that because I don't want to see any fanfic involving Stalin and FDR. But yeah, try to make things as applicable to your life as possible. Maybe I don't want to go into that. But yeah, try to get things to make as interesting as now. Don't Google it. Do not Google it. Don't Google it. Stop. Don't Google it. No, why is this going to be an lecture recording? I'm going to have to do that. I'm going to cut it. Oh no, I have to cut this. But yeah, try to find ways to retain all these facts. All of these events. And some ways might be connecting to stuff you've seen or to stuff you know from pop history. Popular culture as well might help as well. So yeah. What other tips would I have? No, that's really about it. Oh my god, you guys are... Silver, please, you're a chat moderator. So yeah. As for what I ate for lunch, I did not eat a sandwich. No, I did. I ate a chicken sandwich. Can I teach you about Jordan normal form? Okay, Silver, whatever. Yes. So, yes, feats of memory anyone can do. I think it's that TED Talk. Go through that. He gives you some pretty interesting tips. But aside from that, are there any A-push questions? No linear algebra. No linear algebra questions, please. I'll go through that later. Anything about Unit 4, or maybe preparation for the exam. I know Rimu doesn't have a question. I know Chaos and someone didn't have a question. Also, someone's... they eat sandwich, and can you explain between the bread slices? I don't know. I'm not an Irish immigrant from 1840s. I don't know what the Irish ate. Or the Germans. I'm not that immersed into the content. What's my favorite unit? Chinese immigrants are going to come into play around mainly Unit 6, Gilded Age. My personal favorite unit, would probably be either Unit 5 or Unit 6. Okay. With that said, any questions left? Well, I'm assuming there are no more questions. When did the Irish... I said Unit 6. So the Gilded Age. Because we see the rise of Chinese immigration during that point. The late 1800s. And responses to that. Yeah, it looks like you all are done with A-Push. Either you guys are tired of talking about A-Push or you have no questions. And I think it's both. Because yapping about A-Push also makes me tired. Alright. With that said, I think it's fair to end the recording. So for those of you who are watching the recording, I'm sorry you had to go through whatever was going on in chat that was in full display. So yeah. This concludes the lecture for now. And we will continue this in the second part, so that will be recorded as well.